everyone, welcome to GilbHub TV. A little while ago I asked the members of my BRX group to help me come up with some ideas for video content and blog content and presentations, and I asked them what sorts of things they struggled with when it came to copywriting and expressing themselves or expressing things on behalf of their business, because obviously that's what I do for a living. And one of the ideas that came up, which I thought was really good, is how to explain and communicate a complicated product simply in a way that people can easily grasp onto and understand, particularly if they're not part of the industry that you're from. And this is something that I've been doing quite a lot of recently. I've worked on different client projects that have this kind of element to them, of having something that's really quite complicated and quite technical and specific, but where you want to express it in a way that everyone can understand and identify with and just get along with. So I'm going to be sharing a few tips for doing just that in this video. So tip number one is to dispense with technical lingo and with acronyms as much as you can. So you've got to remember that people who are reading this, quite often your customers or people that you want to be reading your content, aren't necessarily going to understand the same technical terms, the same language and the same acronyms as you're familiar with. So even though it might just be second nature to you to talk in terms of these things, it's going to be new to them. And if you're reading something and you come across lots of different words and phrases and things that you don't understand, it can be very, very off-putting. So not only will you not deliver your message clearly, but you're probably actually going to annoy the person who's reading a little bit as well. If you do need to include these things, because sometimes there's no other way around it, sometimes you really have to be specific with what you're talking about and use these kinds of language, then there are ways that you can explain it to people. So if you're going to use a technical term, then try including an explanation afterwards. So you could say this technical term, and then you could follow it with this is a blah blah blah, and just explain what it is that you're talking about. Now obviously if you've managed to pare down the technical language as much as you can, then you won't have to do that too much, because otherwise it could become a bit wordy. But that's a good way of kind of letting people know what it is you're talking about. And the same with acronyms. If you're using acronyms, they're a great linguistic device because sometimes titles are really, really long and you don't want to have to write the whole title every time, because that would become very long-winded for the reader. So acronyms are great, but what you need to do is make sure that you explain them the first time you use them. So if you're using an acronym, which is just a few letters, you want to immediately follow it with the full version. Or another way around that you can do it is to write the full version and then write the acronym in brackets. And once that's been explained and people understand what it is you're talking about, you can then go through and use the acronym without explaining it for the rest of the copy. And just bear in mind that if you're doing this for something like a website, then every time you go to a new page on the website, you need to make sure that you've explained your acronym again, because people might be coming to just that page without having read necessarily the other pages that came before it. Another thing you can think about is just how much information you want to share at any one stage of the conversation. So if you have a product that you're trying to explain, you might have a website that's full of content about it. You might also have blog articles or articles that you publish in external publications that link back to your website. You might have a print brochure that goes with the product. You might have conversations just in person. There are lots of different layers to this conversation, this overall conversation that you're creating around your product. So think about how much information you need to share at each individual layer. So it might be that if you've got a one-page brochure, one-page leaflet that you're giving out to people at meetings and at events, then that would have quite a top-level explanation in it, but then it would have a link to the website where you can find out more information. Likewise, the website might have just the bare minimal information on the homepage, but then it might have links to find out more if you want to dig deeper throughout the other pages of the site. And this is a good way of doing things because it's easy to navigate, it's easy to use, and it also lets the reader decide how much information they want. So if you're giving them the important stuff up front, if they're then interested, if they feel like it's relevant to them, that it applies to them, they can then go and look for the extra information, and when they find it, it's not bombarding them because they've gone to look for it. There's a school of thought that says that in advertising and marketing, you should just focus on one main message when you're promoting your product. And I think really this is going to depend on a case-by-case basis. It's going to depend on the product, on the purpose of the writing, on the media, what it is that you're actually trying to convey. But I think it's definitely worth thinking about, depending on exactly what it is that you're trying to produce, whether it's, a headline for an article, a banner advert, whatever it is. Think about whether you can pare down all of the different features to just one key idea. And this kind of ties in with the next point, which is think about what the customer wants to hear. And this kind of goes across all marketing communications or copywriting, anything where you're really trying to promote yourself. You have to think about what the person reading it wants to know. And that doesn't always match up with what you want to tell them. So if you have a very complicated product, there might be layers and layers and intricacies of wonderful things about this product, and you may feel like you want to share it all. But again, go back to thinking about what information is needed when. It might be that at the beginning, whether that's in a brochure or the homepage of your website or an advert that clicks through to your website, wherever it is that you're trying to hook people, if hooking people in is the key thing that you want to do, then you might just need to focus on one idea that is going to appeal to them, which may not be the biggest, best, brightest thing about your product in your mind, but if it's the thing that they care about, if it's the one thing that solves the problem for them, then that's going to be what hooks them. And once they're hooked, then you can tell them about all of the other wonderful things that this product will do for them. But again, think about it, come at it from the perspective of them, and then work back to tell them everything else that they might want to know. Okay, so you've hooked your reader, and now you're into those sub-pages of your website or that extra bit of your brochure where they want to find out all of the wonderful details about your complicated product. So apart from explaining technical terms where you have to use them and explaining acronyms, there are a few other things you can do to make your reader's life easier, and it's all really to do with the formatting of your copy. So the language needs to be easy to understand, but the formatting, the way it looks on the page, makes a huge difference to the reader's experience as well. So quite a lot of the time, instead of using massive chunks and paragraphs of copy, it can be really helpful to split things into short paragraphs. Even paragraphs of 1 or 2 sentences can be appropriate depending on where it is that you're writing. So if you split it up, it's just going to make it easier to digest, it's going to be easier on the eye, and particularly if you're talking about something complex, it kind of gives it that paced, steady feel when you're reading it rather than just an overload of information. Another thing you can do is split things into bullet points, and that's a really useful way of taking out some of the faff when you're reading. So you might have a few short paragraphs and then you might have a few bullet points, and you're explaining things as you go in clear, concise language, and that whole package together should be a lot easier to digest than just blurring all of your technical knowledge at the poor person who's reading it. So the last tip is the read out loud test, and I've talked about this in other videos to do with proofing and to do with tone of voice, and it's something that can really help here too. So once you have a draft, once you have a piece of writing to work with, then just read it out loud to yourself. And what you want is to find that the language is concise and clear and conversational to an extent. Obviously, for more corporate professional pieces, it might need to be in a certain style. But generally, if it sounds like something that you would say to someone or someone would say to you, then I think you're probably along the right lines for something that's easy to understand. If it sounds quite stuffy, if it sounds like a complicated internal document or a manual for your product, then it's probably a little bit too technical still. So go back and edit it again. And then as a last test, get someone else to read it, someone who's not from your industry, who's not from your company, ideally someone who doesn't understand what it is you're talking about at all until they read your documentation. And then if they read it and they understand it and they can follow it, then you know you're on the right track. So I hope you found these tips useful. If you'd like to learn more about me, please visit my website, www.gilbhub.com. And if you have any requests for videos, any things that you struggle with copywriting, then just leave me a comment below or message me on Twitter at @HannahGilb. Thanks for watching.